So dito sa Herstory Talks, pag-uusapan natin ang iba't ibang mga women from our history.
Pero syempre, bago natin gawin yun, magpapakilala muna tayo, di ba, Kat?
Yes.
So, hello everyone, I'm Julia.
At ako naman si Kat.
And we welcome you to the very first episode of our podcast! Yay!
Hi,
Ayan.
guys!
So, ano sinabi ni Kat kanina, dito sa Herstory Talks, pag-uusapan natin ang mga women from our history. So, all the way from the Spanish colonization up to the time of martial law, Kat and I will share the stories of women who have made an impact in our society and country. Most especially those we don't hear about often.
Pero bago tayo magsimula, gusto ko tatanungin, Julia, sinong women yun nilook up mo the most and why?
Grabe, parang
Sa
pang
history,
universal tanungan.
Siyempre.
Pwede ba next question na
Hindi,
lang?
sagutin mo yan.
But a woman in history that I really look up to the most is Remedios Gomez, also known as Commander Liwayway. Pero syempre, we don't want to spoil anything muna kasi isa siya sa mga icons na pag-uusapan natin later on. What about you, Kath?
Ako naman si Maria Lorena Barros at malalaman din natin yan sa next episodes kung bakit.
Ayan. Diba, there are so many women in our history and talaga nakaka-excite na pag-usapan ang mga kwento nila.
Real. Tama. At para sa pinakauna nating episode, lahat ng women na pag-uusapan natin are from the time of the Spanish colonization.
Ayan.
The very
So,
first.
As we all know, 300 years tayong sinakop ng mga Spaniards. And during that time, many men and women fought for our freedom.
Kaya naman, the first woman that we'll talk about, hindi lang siya teacher, but a fierce soldier as well. Imaginein mo yun.
Wow naman, matalino na nga, matapang pa. Eh, sino ba yan?
Ako yun.
Grabe.
Well, Teresa Magbanwa E. Ferraris, also known as Nay Isa, was born on October 13, 1868 to Don Juan Magbanwa and Doña Alejandra Ferraris in Pototan, Iloilo. So, she earned her teaching certificate at Colegio de Doña Cecilia and took her master's degree sa University of Santo Tomas.
So, Teresa was a teacher in her hometown for 4 years and had later on married Alejandro Balderas. Pero, she learned how to ride horses and fire both a piston and a rifle. Akalain mo yon? In case may mga dumating na bandits sa kanila.
Ito pa, when the Spanish-Filipino War reached Iloilo, so si Teresa and her brothers Elias and Pascual joined the revolution, but sadly her husband and uncle didn't like the idea at first. So kinumbinsi niya na women can fight too. So she was given her own troop who called her Nay Isa.
Ayan, yes. Tapos, her very first battle was at Yating in Pilar, Capiz, and successfully, she, along with her troops, were able to defeat the Spanish army, which was followed by another battle in Sapong in the mountains of Sara. Pero kahit daw half-starved and kulang-kulang ang mga weapons ni Teresa and her troops, they still fought and won against the Spaniards.
Palaban. So Teresa then later on lost her brother, sadly, on February 11, 1898 sa American-Filipino War, where all three of them fought together. But despite their efforts, Santa Barbara fell into the hands of the Americans. So they had to shift to guerrilla tactics, no? But her disappointment towards the surrender of the Filipino generals to the Americans, accompanied by the grief of losing her brothers, made her disband her troop, but still hindi siya sumuko. Talking about a courageous woman, no?
Tama. After that, Teresa lived a quiet life in her husband's hometown. But during the Japanese occupation, she sold her property to financially help the guerrilla movement against the Japanese.
Yes, and after World War II, Teresa moved to Pagayan sa Zamboanga, where she lived with her sisters. But sadly, she passed away noong August 1941. But her burial was unannounced. And those who attended the funeral were only close friends, relatives.
Ayun. So, dyan na nagtatapos ang ating unang kwento, di ba? Grabe, una pa lang yan, pero ang dami na agad nangyari.
Kaya nga, such a courageous heroine Teresa was, di ba? And one of the women that we should look up to.
Tapos, very admirable yun, di ba, Kat? Na she taught herself how to ride horses, pati matuto how to use a rifle and a pistol to not only defend herself, but also the people in
Not
their
herself,
town.
yes. And nagamit din niya yung mga natutuhan niya para to fight for our country's independence. Kahit na, syempre, hindi pumayag yung husband niya, yung uncle niya. Pero anyway, sino namang women yung next in line?
Ayan. So if Teresa Magbanwa was a loving sibling, our next featured woman naman is a great mother. So the previous woman that we talked about was a revolutionary. But the next one is a different kind of revolutionary naman. So Nazaria Labriliaso Lagos, also known as the Florence Nightingale of Panay, was born on August 28, 1851 in Borongan, Dueñas, Iloilo, to Juan de la Cruz Lagos and Saturnina Labrillosa.
So, ayun, during her childhood, Nazaria studied with private tutors and her mother was one of them. Then, when she reached the age of 21, pinakasalan naman niya si Segundo Lagos, okay, the son of Bartolome Lagos, who established the town of Dueñas.
With the aid of her husband, Nazaria learned how to read and write in Spanish. Then, when Segundo took on the position of chief sacristan, which was only second to the parish priest in their town, Nazaria received respect and was seen in a high regard by the town's elite.
Mayaman pala. Yes, and Nazaria became the first president of Cruz Roja, which we now know as Red Cross in Iloilo, nung ginawa yun.
Aside from that, Nazaria and her husband secretly assisted the Filipino revolutionaries by allowing their houses to be a secret place for meetings, whereas leaders would discuss and plot against the Spaniards.
Illicit meeting. So Nazaria was also appointed as the head of the Revolutionaries Hospital in Hagitnit and was the only one who manages the place where they secretly piled food. Nagtago sila ng food.
Aside from that, Nazaria also used herbal medicines instead of pharmaceutical medicines and called in herbolarios to tend to the sick in the hospital. Tapos, pati yung mga deceased patients, nasa hospital din sila and also wounded soldiers.
Then, aside from tending to the sick, Nazaria and her daughters will always be remembered kasi ginawa nila yung Philippine flag that was raised in Dueñas noong June 12, 1898, which symbolized the proclamation of the country's independence sa Panay.
Ayan. Then later on, Nazaria would lose 2 of her children, sadly, to the smallpox epidemic. And after a few years, she allotted her time by caring for her family naman.
In her later years, Nazaria ended up blind and eventually met her demise on January 27, 1945 at the age of 95. So, ayun, dyan na nga nagtatapos ang ating pangalawang kwento, di ba? Ang bilis.
Alam mo, Kat, personally, I think Nazaria was a great example of how we use our resources to help others. I mean, kasi mayaman sila, ganon, and they were highly looked upon, pero they offered their house as a meeting place and even aided in healing the sick and wounded.
I agree, no? Gaya nga na na-mention mo kanina, di ba? Nazaria was a different kind of revolutionary. She treated the sick and the wounded soldiers and even she was respected by the elites, mga mayaman. Sumabak pa rin siya sa laban in her own way.
Kanina, ang kwento natin was about someone fierce, di ba? Then ngayon naman, about a mother that was a great healer. Nakakadalawang kwento na tayo, pero nakikita na natin ang iba't ibang galing ng mga kababaihan.
Real. At para naman sa pinakahuli nating kwento, di ba? Pag-uusapan natin ang heroine of Jaro na si Patrocinio Gamboa, who was also known as Tia Patro.
Ayan. So Patrocinio was born on April 30, 1865 to Fermin Gamboa and Leonarda Villarreal. And they were a family of ilustrados, so she grew up in the rich district of Haro, Iloilo.
So Patrocinio was well-educated, pero she only became politically aware of the abuses that Filipinos face after reading the novels of Jose Rizal and La Solidaridad. Also, due to her gender and affluence, she was off the Spaniards' radar. So, she used this to her advantage. She became an intelligence agent and she provided both important and classified information sa mga revolutionaries.
Ayan. Patrocinio was one of the first to join the Philippine Revolution back in 1896, and she was one of those who organized the Comité Conspirador and Comité Central Revolucionario de Visayas, which would later on become the Revolutionary Government of Visayas. And on November 17, 1898, this government was inaugurated with the flag-raising ceremony as its highlight.
and a replica okay, of the Philippine flag na tinahin mismo ni Patrocinio herself and several women of Molo was to be delivered sa headquarters of General Martin Delgado for the inauguration. So ayun, kinuha niya yung role.
So, riding a tartanilla, which was a horse-drawn buggy during that time, along with Lieutenant Honorio Solinap, Patrocinio traveled through several checkpoints heavily guarded by the Spaniards, with the flag tied to her waist under her patadyong skirt.
Tapos tuwing nandun sila sa checkpoint, they would pretend to have a husband and wife quarrel. Imagine mo yun, with Patrocinio acting as a dominant wife. And this plan managed to entertain the guards who didn't even bother to check na buggy sila. Pero kasi, dala-dala rin nila yung saber galing kay General Emilio Aguinaldo, which was a gift to General Martin Delgado, and this was hidden under a huge bundle of grass. So, yung delivery was successful.
Ayan. And then, when the Filipino-American War reached Panay, Patrocinio led the women of Panay in doing various tasks like tending to the sick and wounded, collecting alms and war contributions, soliciting food and medical supplies, delivering military dispatches to various Filipino commands, and even doing several other tasks that risked their lives.
Dahil sa mga nagawa niya, no, Patrocinio was given the title, ayun nga, Heroine of Jaro. But sadly, she passed away on November 24, 1953, at the age of 88, where she was buried with military honors at Haros Balantang Veteran Cemetery.
There we have it. Ayun na po ang huling kwento natin for today's episode. So ano ang mga natutunan mo, Kat, after natin marinig ang mga kwento nila Teresa Magbanwa, Nazaria Labrillo Salago, and Patrocinio Gamboa?
Ako na naman tinanong mo. Ayan. So, given the circumstances noon na talaga namang talamak yung gender disparities at palaging nilolook down yung mga kababaihan, they still managed to become leaders and revolutionaries.
Agree. And tama, no? Nakwento din sa atin sa Women's Studies yung kay Patrocinio at talagang hinangaan natin siya dahil doon. Kaya naman, sana nagustuhan ninyo ang mga kwentong pinag-usapan natin at sana na-inspire rin kayo kahit papaano.
So, kung gusto nyo pa makita into detail yung mga kwento ng mga women na aming pinag-usapan, you may check the links to our sources below, guys. Check nyo lang.
Ayan. So, paano ba yan, Kat? It's time to say goodbye.
Pa. Ayan. So, oo nga pero ang bilis kasi. Pero di bale makikita-kita tayo ulit next time for more stories about the women in our history. Kaya, stay tuned lang kayo.
Tama. So, once again, this has been Julia
And Kat, and sana samahan niyo muli kami sa susunod na episode dito lang sa
Herstory Talks. Bye!
Bye, guys!